I'm Darius Spearman, and you're watching African Elements. For all its virtues, the United States Constitution had one major oversight, a flaw that would ultimately lead to the bloodiest conflict in U.S. history, the Civil War. We'll see why, coming up. Welcome back to African Elements. As I'm filming this video, African Elements is on the cusp of 2,000 subscribers, and I cannot thank you enough. I'm planning a live stream special to say thank you and give you some updates on some of my goals and the future of the channel. But in the meantime, thank you so much for supporting, liking, subscribing, and commenting. Yes, even the trolls. But I'll get to that at the end of the video. For now, I just want to say thank you and of course give a special shout out to my Patreon members who you can join for as little as $1 a month. That gets you access to ad-free content and exclusive videos and content available only to Patreon members. Otherwise, a like and subscribe would also be hugely appreciated. So let's jump into the content. In this video, we look at the United States Constitution and why it inevitably led to civil war. On September 17, 1787, a group of men, about a third of whom were slaveholders, ratified a document originally premised on a bold declaration that all men are created equal and are endowed by the Creator with rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. I'll address the obvious contradictions in a later video, but for the purpose of this video, it's important to note that conflicting interests between slaveholders and non-slaveholders would be a challenge throughout the Constitutional Convention. While Northerners sought to craft a document to their benefit, which included, among other things, maintaining a representative advantage in the Congress that would allow them to craft legislation and taxation advantageous to non-slaveholding interests, the Southern states were ready to bolt if their slaveholding interests were threatened in any way. So, how did the framers of the Constitution deal with these competing interests? In short, they didn't. The result is an almost comical avoidance in directly addressing the issue of slavery. In fact, a quick search of the U.S. Constitution reveals that neither do the words slave nor slavery appear anywhere in the document. One of the ways conflict arose came when the convention settled on a model in which representation in the House of Representatives was determined by population. The larger a state's population, the more representatives for that state. But what about slaves? Did they count as part of the state's population? For the northern states, who clearly wanted to stack the number of representatives in their favor, the answer was clearly no. For southerners who wanted to use the slave population to boost their representation in the House, the answer was clearly yes. In reconciling the conflict, the infamous Three-Fifths Compromise was born. The Three-Fifths Clause stated that representation shall be determined by adding the whole number of free persons, including those bound to service for a term of years, and excluding Indians non-taxed, and 3/5 of all other persons. What? All other persons? See what I mean by their comical avoidance of the word slave? Nevertheless, even though the northern population grew faster than the South, the Three-Fifths Compromise boosted Southern power in the Congress and propelled 7 out of the first 10 U.S. presidents from the southern state of Virginia alone. Next, what if a slave escaped to a non-slaveholding state? What would be the status of that slave? In another example of comical avoidance of the word slave, the Constitution includes a strangely worded clause that reads, "No person held to service of labor in one state, under the laws thereof escaping into another, shall in consequence of any law or regulation be discharged from such service or labor, but shall be delivered upon the claim of the party to whom such service or labor may be due." Well, that's a very strange way of including a fugitive slave clause in the Constitution, but okay. Finally, what authority would Congress hold over the slave trade? Again, without mentioning the S word, the Constitution allowed the slave trade to continue for the next 20 years in yet another strangely worded clause. The migration or importation of such persons as any of the states now existing shall think proper to admit, shall not be prohibited by the Congress prior to the year 1808. As vaguely written as these references to slavery were, the rift between North and South was already so great, the Constitution wouldn't have been ratified without them, a fact that prompted James Madison to declare, "Great as the evil is, a dismemberment of the Union would be worse." That the Constitution was so vague on the issue of slavery left the Union with no constitutional means to deal with the issue, a problem that would finally come to a head 47 years later. The first sign of trouble occurred as soon as the peace deal was ratified with Britain. By the terms of the treaty, Britain granted independence to its 13 North American colonies. The problem was that Britain had no further need for the Western territories it had acquired from France as a result of the 7 Years' War, so that land was also ceded to the United States. Immediately, the US doubled its size and created a new western frontier. Why was that a problem? Well, suddenly we have a large new territory and two emerging sections, North and South, that have competing interests in terms of what should be done with the newly acquired land. So, would this new territory be an extension of Southern slaveholding interests? Or would it be a safety valve, allowing Northern interests to continue to exploit the cheap labor of poor whites with the promise of free land for them out west? I know. Let's just consult the Constitution. Oh, wait. Herein lies a problem that the United States is going to confront with every territorial acquisition, and there's simply no constitutional remedy. Only a series of failed compromises and failed attempts to maintain the delicate balance between Northern and Southern interests. In this particular case, Thomas Jefferson proposed that slavery not be introduced in the territory west of the Appalachians. Why would Thomas Jefferson, a man who owned hundreds of slaves, suggest that slavery not be introduced on the frontier? The frontier tends to be an attractive place for poor and marginalized folk. There was already a steady stream of poor white ethnic Europeans who were supplying cheap labor for Northern industry. Many of those poor ethnic whites were finding that the wealthy elite were largely reaping the rewards of their labor. As we saw in Bacon's Rebellion, that could be dangerous, potentially creating another discontented class of poor whites that could end up revolting against the elite. The frontier offered poor whites cheap land and an opportunity to acquire wealth. That is, unless those poor whites had to go head-to-head with slave labor. For that reason, slavery was the last thing these poor whites wanted to see out in the frontier. Jefferson recognized that and was perfectly happy to see those poor whites out of sight on the frontier and out of mind. It turns out slavery would have ruined that dynamic. For Southern slave owners, the increasing profitability of slave labor made expansion of slavery into the West inevitable. So here we have our first crisis of the post-revolutionary period. What to do? In this case, the crisis was resolved by extending the Mason-Dixon line to the Ohio River, where it was determined the territory north of the Ohio River be opened up to non-slaveholding interests, while slavery was allowed to expand south of the Ohio River and west to the Mississippi. So the crisis in the Ohio Valley was averted, for now. But obviously we can see where this is going. We've got a lot of territory to go, and with each addition comes another attempt to solve this problem. The Missouri Compromise in 1820, the Compromise of 1850, and the Kansas-Nebraska Act all attempted and failed to address this problem. The continued expansion westward, the competing interests between North and South over the western frontier, and the failure of the nation's founders to provide any constitutional means of addressing the issue of slavery put the country on a collision course toward civil war. That much was clear after the Supreme Court's final failed attempt to resolve the constitutionality of slavery in the Dred Scott decision of 1857. But in hindsight, we can see that the Civil War was inevitable the moment the ink dried on the United States Constitution. Thank you for watching, and now it's time for our comment of the week. This one comes from my video on Dane Calloway. And let me tell you, the comment section on that video is an absolute goldmine. But this one comes from a troll named Kristen Broom, who writes, "Caught you lying, Pinocchio emoji, and you still on here pushing BS?" I of course replied, giving him 3 options. 1. Provide the details on when he caught me lying, what lie I supposedly told, and demonstrate that I was lying. 2. Apologize for calling me a liar. Or 3. Get blocked from my channel. Providing neither the first nor second option, he's now blocked. Thank you, Kristen, for demonstrating for our viewers how to get your ass blocked from my channel. I'm Darius Spearman, and until next time, I'll see you in the comments.